this part of the journey with Natty Mark is called Honouring My Mother, and it kind of celebrates the Windrush generation and their impact on British society. This is the photograph of my mother, who, as you can see, was a nurse. She was one of those that came over here in the 50s and became a nurse. Nye Bevan, who I think of as kind of the beautiful visionary of British politics, instigated the National Health Service. But then they found that there was a real shortfall of staff, thousands. So then a campaign went out in the Caribbean through the press in the various islands such as Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, to invite people over to staff the National Health Service. And there was also a campaign which was first kind of established in Barbados to invite people over to man the national transport system, to be bus drivers and bus conductors and such forth. So yeah, my mother was one of those who came over here and became a nurse. My endearing, because she passed away when I was a child, but one kind of enduring image of her is of her in a uniform going off on a little scooter to drive to the local hospital to work. This when we lived in a Braintree in Essex. So this image is just there of this her on a little kind of scooter going off in a nurse's uniform to work in a local hospital. Okay, so when we look at the Windrush generation, we tend to focus on that, the kind of input that generation gave to health and to transport. But let's look at the contribution that he made to culture and music, and let's look at the actual kind of some of the characters who are actually on the Windrush. Okay, first person I'd like to mention is Sam King. Okay, Sam King. As you can see, he fought in the war, so he came over here, and his story is that he'd so the Gleaner is one of the big papers in Jamaica, and he had seen an advert in there where they were asking for volunteers, and because he had this fear that if Hitler got in, then the people in Jamaica would be enslaved under Nazi rule. He said, I've got to make my contribution. So, so he came over here, like many others who joined the RAF, went and done his military service, or started his military training in North Yorkshire at the Filey camp, and then from there became an engineer in the ground crew. After the war, he went back to Jamaica, kind of restless, couldn't find work, and then he saw another advert in the Gleaner, and so he kind of signed up and came over here on the Windrush and became a community activist and a councillor. And one of his kind of accolades that he became the first ever black mayor of Southwark Council. Okay, so that's Sam King. Okay, another one. We enter music. Yeah, the last four that I'm going to mention made their contribution through music. This is Lord Woodbine. Now, he had also fought in the war. He had lied about his age. He was 14, signed up, came over here, done his service, went back, and then came back on the Windrush. Now, he's often known as the Sixth Beatle. This is when they were known as the Silver Beatles. So kind of ended up in Liverpool, became one of the musicians in the first Calypso touring group in this country. Founded clubs up north in Liverpool, and the Beatles would come and listen to him. He gave them gigs at his club. Even when they done their first tour in Germany, he was with them, and there's a classic photograph of him with who's in the picture? George Harrison and Paul McCartney. Apparently, John Lennon, as a pacifist, refused to get out of the car. But there's a picture of them at a Dutch war cemetery. Classic photograph, which you can see on the net. But yeah, as I said, they used to follow him around to his gigs. When he opened up a club in Liverpool, he gave them gigs there. And even in Hamburg, he actually got on stage and kind of performed on the same stage as them. So when they were an up-and-coming band called the Silver Beatles, he was, I mean, they were even sometimes called the Woodbine Boys, because they were so associated with him in Liverpool. They be sometimes known as the Woodbine Boys. So that's Lord Woodbine, one of the kind of early pioneers of Calypso in this country, from Trinidad, a friend and mentor to the Beatles, Lord Woodbine. Okay, next one here is a more famous figure, one of the kind of major legendary figures in Calypso, Lord Kitchener. Well, now when we think of Kitchener, we think of kind of the First World War recruitment poster with that picture of Lord Kitchener saying, "We want you." This is Lord Kitchener, the Calypso legend. So he was already well known in Trinidad as a Calypso star, and even in America, because Trinidad was quite important to the Second World War, not only because of the personnel, but also because of the oil that was theirs. So that was safeguarded. So there were a lot of Americans stationed in Trinidad. So through that connection, them listening to his music in Trinidad, he was then offered gigs in America. And then when he came over here, that really kind of shot him to international stardom, because then he was doing gigs in Britain and in Europe and such forth. So that's Lord Kitchener, one of the major figures in Calypso. Okay, another figure from Trinidad, Mona Baptiste. Mona Baptiste. So she was already a star in Trinidad, like Lord Kitchener, but coming here kind of raised her into the international sphere. So she was one of the first performers on British TV concerning Caribbean music. So that's Mona Baptiste, who ended up going to live in Germany, starred in films. Then from Germany, she ended up living in Dublin and actually died in Dublin. She married an Irish man.
So there we have the great Duke Vin. So I've introduced you to start off with someone from Jamaica, Sam King, three Trinidadians who pioneered Calypso music in this country. And now we're going to go back to Jamaica, Duke Vin. So when we think about sound systems in this country, now we think about people like Just Shaka and Channel One. He set up the first sound system in this country in 1955. He didn't actually come over here on the Windrush. He came over here 10 years later. And in connection with him is a man called Headley Jones, who's like an unsung genius of modern Jamaican music. Especially when we think of the sound engineering aspect, we think of people like King Tubby and people like Lee Scratch Perry. And he's one who's kind of fallen through the net, so to speak. But he came over here during the war, trained as a radar engineer, took all that knowledge back. You know, he knew about, how to work these sound waves and such things. And set up the first sound systems in Jamaica. So when we think of the first sound systems, we think of the Channel One sound system, not the Channel One, sorry, the Studio One sound system, Cox and Dodd. We think of the Duke Reed sound system, and Tom Wong had a sound system called Tom the Great Sebastian. So once again, we go back to when we looked at Jamaica to Japan, and we looked at the history of modern Jamaican music and its international reach. And I spoke to you about some of the pioneering Chinese Jamaicans. So Tom Wong, as I said, was Chinese, set up the one of the first sound systems. And it was Headley Jones, who, as I say, come over here during the war, trained as an engineer, went back there and set up the first sound systems in Jamaica. And the connection with him is that Duke Vin was a selector on the Tom the Great Sebastian sound system. So he come over here in 1954, stowed away on a boat with Count Suckle, who set up the next sound system here. 1954, moved to the Notting Hill area, and the next year, 1955, he set up the first ever sound system in England. And it was this sound system that basically pioneered ska music. So originally it played R&B, Louis Jordan, Fats Domino, Roscoe Gordon, these kind of people. Ska came along, and he was one who pioneered ska music in this country. So this is the great Duke Vin. So when we think, as I say, when we think about great sound systems, we think about the guys who kind of came up in the mid-70s, Coxsone and Shaka and such people, and King Earthquake. But this man set up the first one in 1955. Respect.